Okay. I think that we're good to begin. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tri-University Research Administration Conference Lunchtime Information Booth. My name is Natalia Arenio, and I'm a grant contract specialist at Arizona State University. With me today are Jessica Robbins, Nancy Parker, and Tiffany Lehn. And before we jump into our Q&A, we'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes, as you can see on the slide here. So please mute your computer or your phone when you're not speaking. And if you have a question for any of our presenters, or I guess our one speaker, Justin, today, please feel free to drop it into the chat and Jessica will be monitoring it. Before we continue, here is Jessica with our land acknowledgement.
Yes, hi. So for some of the sessions, we've just been rotating which university statement we're sharing or reviewing, since we do each acknowledge this differently, but we'll go ahead and share the University of Arizona's this time. So we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Odom and Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So,
Thank you, Jessica. Once again, thanks to everyone for joining us today for our lunchtime information booth. So we'd like to welcome Justin Pohl from the National Science Foundation. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Can you please tell us more about yourself, such as how long you've been in research administration, how long you've worked for NSF, and what you did before your position there? The questions are also on the slide for your reference.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you. It's kind of a little bit of a taste of home, as I was born and raised in Arizona myself. I've been in research administration now since 2006, so that's just about 17 years. I'm currently the section chief of our payments and outreach section within the Division of Financial Management at the National Science Foundation. And so we have a post-award financial focus of our work. And I have been at NSF since 2017 as a permanent employee, but I had also done a 3-year IPA appointment from 2009 to 2012, which is an Intergovernmental Personnel Act appointment that NSF likes to use to rotate folks in from universities or nonprofits. And so my total time at NSF is approaching 10 years. I had been at ASU for nearly just about 10 plus years. I had worked in a variety of different capacities at ASU, but primarily in the central administration function focused on post-award support of the grant and research enterprise.
Well, thank you so much. Okay, so we've come up with a handful of questions to ask you to help get our conversation going. And again, if anyone has any additional thoughts or questions during this, please feel free to drop them in the chat or later towards the end when we open the floor for questions. Justin, we thought it would be fun to start off with an icebreaker before we jump into our questions. So do you want to tell us about your very first job?
Yeah, so I grew up in Northwest Phoenix on the Phoenix-Glendale border, and my first job was a ride operator at Castles and Coasters.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
Which ride was it?
I was trained to operate any of the rides, and so it was on a rotation. Some rides were better than others to operate, though, I must admit.
All right, so I'll just introduce myself to the participants. Justin, you and I have already met. I'm Nancy Parker. I'm the Research Advancement Administrator for the SHESH Department, the School of human evolution and social change. And I've got the next question. In one word, how would you describe your current job?
Fulfilling. And if I might elaborate on that, I have always found it very easy to get behind the mission of the National Science Foundation and to be able to connect what I do with how it supports so many people.
Great.
Thanks. And I get to ask the next question. For everyone, I'm Jessica Robbins at Arizona State University in the Central Pre-Award Services Unit. So I get to ask the next question is, Justin, what is the most rewarding part of your job, which you kind of touched on already, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so one of my favorite parts of the job is the outreach component, when I get to go out and meet with folks that we are supporting with the research funds and being able to interact and hear about, kind of witness the commonalities between a lot of the different organizations, what they are going through or dealing with, what kind of challenges they might be having, and just being able to sit down and develop those relationships with the people that email us or call us. That's probably my favorite part of the job.
Okay, it's my turn. My name is Tiffany Lehn. I'm the Assistant Director for International Grant Initiatives at EdPlus at ASU. And my question for you, Justin, is what skills does someone need to advance their career in research administration?
Yeah, so I've thought about that a little bit, and the answer that kept coming to my mind is the need to get comfortable with navigating the gray area. Working in research administration is not always as simple as having a black and white yes or no answer. Obviously, you never want to be crossing the red line, so having a clear understanding of what that red line is, but then being able to navigate the gray area and understand what is being requested of you. Yeah, Jessica, the great answer of it depends. My initial education background is I got an accounting degree. And so I had 4 years at the university being indoctrinated with the black and white mentality, because accountants always want to look at things in a black and white manner. And when I got my first job as a grant and contract accountant, it was an uncomfortable first 6 months of being asked to navigate that gray area within research administration, because I always wanted to apply that lens of, well, it has to be more black and white than that. And that's not the case. And so if you want to have a successful career in research administration, you need to learn how to identify what that red line is so you don't ever cross it, but then be comfortable with helping folks navigate what they're trying to do, the work they're trying to accomplish.
And would you say that has enabled you to be effective in your current role, or is there any additional skills and knowledge that would be necessary to be effective in a role at NSF?
So one of the things that's helped me in particular is I have always found it helpful in navigating my career in understanding my place in the bigger picture, because the life cycle of the award has a lot of different components, and things that get done upstream have an impact downstream. Things that I do has an impact, and understanding the piece of the pie that I have and how the intakes to my piece are impacted by the decisions of others, and how what I do impacts others. Having a good understanding of that I think has been very helpful. And being able to have the experience of working on the grant recipient side and now applying that experience at a grant issuing agency has also been very helpful in a lot of people, even though we have a common objective in research administration, a lot of people will describe what they're asking in slightly different ways. But having that understanding helps me kind of get at understanding what they're trying to ask, even though they might not be framing the question in a way that is easy to interpret. So that has definitely helped me in my current role.
Great response. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very good tip. Okay, so I have the next question. Could you please tell us a little more about your near future goals for your career, if you have any? And this is kind of a two-parter. I think that is also related to your background as NSF being the #2 best workplace in the government. But what is also the application process for applying to NSF? If you would like to share more about your experience or with the application and selection process, that would be great as well.
Yeah, so the application process to get into the federal government is not always the most straightforward. All jobs, well, most jobs are posted to usajobs.gov, which is a central application website for the government. But getting through that process can be difficult at times for people. The resume, a federal government resume, is much different than what most folks might be used to who have never worked in government. I remember as I began my career in corporate and then moving into ASU, it was always recommended to have like a 2-page resume and to keep it short and concise, hitting the highlights. Well, in the federal government, it's not uncommon to see 5 to 10-page resumes, because to get through the application process, if there's a job requirement as a component of that's listed as a requirement of the job that you're applying for, and you're being evaluated on whether you have experience and you're being rated on whether you have the experience that you're claiming to have, what you put on your resume is what you're going to be rated with. And so if the job requires grant-related experience and you don't mention examples of how you've worked with grants, you won't get any score or credit for it, even if you've claimed it in your initial application response, which could impact whether you get cleared for an interview. And so for folks who didn't grow up working, like grow up in their career, like they didn't start initially in the federal government, making that transition can be a little bit jarring for folks, because I definitely had to adapt my resume pattern that I had been using for a number of years in order to make this transition into the federal government. And that was a little bit jarring and unusual to get used to. I lost what I was going to share next, but what was the next part of your question that you're asking?
That was a very thorough answer. The first part was just if you had any near future career goals that you wanted to talk about at NSF or.
Yeah, so I, just like many people, I want to continue to grow as an individual and continue to advance. I'm currently a section chief, and I have aspirations to advance into the executive service. But it takes time. Then there's no guarantee that you'll be able to make that kind of transition from. I'm a GS employee right now, so general schedule employee, and to make the jump from general schedule to the executive service, it can be challenging at times. Like I said, the transition just from non-federal government resumes to federal government resumes, there's a whole nother transition to get into the executive service with the ability to write ECQs, which is the executive core qualifications, and it's a different type of writing about your experiences and stuff. And so when I look at professional development opportunities for myself, it's looking at learning how to make that transition, how to talk about my accomplishments in that manner. And I think it's a good rule of thumb for anybody looking to make career advancements. It's never come naturally to me to sell myself. And a lot of times when you're interviewing or you're looking to advance in your career, you need to become better at talking positively about what you've accomplished and being able to articulate it in a concise manner and get the point across about what your role was, what the problem you're trying to solve, and what the outcome was, and being able to tell that story in an effective manner. And anybody who's been having challenges in getting that next job opportunity or interviewing for that next promotion, think about it to yourself. How well are you doing that? How well are you telling that story about yourself? And that's something that if that's an area that you've been struggling with, look for opportunities to improve in that.
Thank you.
All right.
That's good
Well,
advice.
along that vein, you're talking about, kind of being able to kind of sell yourself and do that, and tell your story, which I love. So what would you say, looking back on your career, that what is the thing that you would say you're most proud of? And I'm sure it's not castles and coasters, but tell us a bit more about what really accomplishments that you feel you've achieved.
So there are a couple things that came to mind with this question. So when I originally went to NSF, like I said, it was in a rotator capacity. And what the NSF folks had been looking for at the time, they were developing a new payment system to replace. I'm going to use some terminology that may not make sense to everybody, but the way NSF used to make payments was in a pooled manner, where the institution would simply say, I need this much money. And as long as you had that much money available in your portfolio, the NSF would pay it. And then you would have to reconcile that with a report after the fact. And that was the old payment method. And they were developing a new system called, eventually it was called the Award Cash Management Service. And they were looking to seek university or grant recipient input into that development of that system. And that's how I got the opportunity to come as a grant recipient user or a post-award administrator. I came to NSF as an IPA to be on that development committee, developing that new payment platform. And I found it very rewarding. It was very eye-opening. A lot of times when you think about what the federal government might be, it's kind of this black box or this nebulous, this untouchable component that you have to work with or interact with. But to be a part of conversations that impacted how things would be done in the future was very eye-opening for me. And some of the things that I was able to advocate for to make things easier for grant recipients as a part of that design or development process, and to see those components actually in the system today. And when I go out and do outreach visits or trainings or demos on the platform itself, and people really compliment, yeah, I love that feature, that makes it so easy. It makes that system stand out from other agency platforms, and to know that I had a hand in incorporating that feature into the system, I find that very rewarding.
That makes sense. And we do like NSF system better than a lot of the ones out there. So I have on the flip side, we all have things that are our responsibility that just need to be done, and they're maybe not our favorite things. So what do you not like doing, and how do you navigate those tasks when they come up?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Jessica, that every job I've had, there's been a component that I don't like doing. And one of the things I learned years ago, this is another thing, I'm going to get to the answer, but I just want to share this. I always look for something to learn from the people I work with, whether I view them as a positive or a negative example. And there was a colleague that I used to work with that I viewed as a negative example, but I tried to still learn something from that person. And the takeaway I learned all those years ago was, just because there's a component of your job that you don't like doing, you can't ignore it. And this was the bad example that this other colleague was doing, is they just avoided that part of their job that they didn't like doing, and it would always pile up and become a big fire drill. And so I've always made it an effort that I have to consciously spend time doing those things that I don't necessarily enjoy. I can't let the things that I do enjoy just consume all of my time, because a lot of times those things might they may still be important to do, right? So getting to the answer, what do I not like doing, is having to, when the final answer is an absolute no, that's not the funnest thing to do. There are times, especially during our year-end process at NSF, where we shut down our system for the final week of the year, and when there are awards that are impacted by canceling appropriations, which means that when that cutoff time comes, the faucet, that bank account, basically with the Treasury, is shut off. The grant recipient and NSF no longer has access to those funds. And when you have somebody reach out saying if they can't get that payment, their institution is going to be out $80,000 or $200,000, and you still have to basically say no in the end, that's a challenging conversation to have. And that often gets escalated to my level. So my staff will field the initial request, and the people, they will provide the initial response of no, but oftentimes people will ask, is there any exception that can be done? And so that will get escalated to my level, and I still have to walk them through why it's a no. And it's a challenging part of the job for sure.
I think a lot of us can relate to that, when we can offer other options sometimes, and sometimes there's just that's not going to go through, but this is maybe what we could look at next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Justin, can you tell us a little bit about your team at NSF?
Yeah, so within my branch, there are 10 positions. Right now, we're a staff of 8 because we have 2 vacancies that we're actively looking to recruit. But on my team specifically, I have 4 staff and 1 vacancy, and the staff all have very similar functions and jobs that they do. But the way that we split up our portfolio is by state assignments. So if an institution is located within a particular state, the point of contact that they would have for customer service, like post-award financial customer service inquiries, would go to the individual assigned that state. And then they have a variety of experience. I have two staff on my team that probably have close to 30 years of experience each. And then I have somebody who's more of a mid-career level and somebody who just joined our team less than 2 years ago. So a variety of experience.
I feel like your team might be built into this, but what are your favorite parts about working with NSF?
Yeah, the opportunities. I kind of alluded to this before. It's to be able to be a part of conversations and be able to have input that affects decisions that are made that have lasting impacts. That is something that I really loved my time at ASU, but that was not something that I had ever been a part of at the university level. Sometimes I think about the Hamilton song and being in the room where it happens. Sometimes you get that opportunity to be in the room where certain decisions are being discussed, and you have a chance to impact change. That probably one of my favorite parts. And I think of a particular project that I've been working on for over 3 years now. There are several aspects of the federal government that are evaluating the use of distributed ledger technology within federal government, and I've had the opportunity to work on several collaboration projects with the Department of Treasury on building out use cases on how DLT or blockchain as a form of DLT could be utilized as a next generation platform for payment systems, and to be part of that conversation and contributing to the ideas. I remember being a part of a conversation with Treasury folks and how we aspire at NSF to not request duplicate information. If we already have the information, we strive to pre-populate it in our forms. And one of the folks at Treasury was like, yeah, we should probably do that more. And a couple months later, this is a very specific federal platform, but it's how we transmit our payment files from the agency over to Treasury for them to be processed and paid. It's called the Secure Payment System. And up to that point, the Secure Payment System, we would transmit our payment schedule data via a system interface, but then our data entry operators always had to manually enter everything into the SPS system. And I recall a few months after having that conversation as a component of our blockchain work, they offered a option to import the payment schedule so you didn't have to read data, like duplicate enter the information they already had access to. And I was like, hey, did that come from that conversation? You know, it's that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in a personal question. Have you met Gene Feldman?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Wow.
I love working with Jean. She's a rock star in the grant research community.
Yeah, no doubt. But boy, if and when she retires, I can't imagine what our grant administration world would be without her. She's been amazing. Okay, the next question we have, I want to talk a little bit about what any challenges that you see working with NSF. Obviously, working in the federal government, things probably move at a different pace than we're used to here at the university. So you want to talk a little bit about the challenges?
Yeah, one of the challenges is the fact that we don't always have control. It's a very political environment out here. When I think about a couple years ago, we had a 35-day federal government shutdown. That was completely outside of any of our control. And I was one of the staff that still needed to work with no guarantee of being paid. Because payments for our critical infrastructure, like NSF supports the United States infrastructure in Antarctica, those payments still had to go out, even though we were technically shut down. And there were some other projects that were like that too. And that operating in that type of environment sometimes can be challenging. I remember not knowing how long that was going to go, and it's very expensive to live out here, and I knew I have a family with 4 children, and I knew we could probably go 2 months without a paycheck. But after 30 days, I was starting to sweat a little bit. Like, what are we going to do? And so, and the fact that, every administration change, the priorities change a little bit. And so that can be a little challenging to navigate too. And so that kind of stuff, that's what I see to be different and challenging working at NSF.
Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned cost of living, but what are your favorite parts of being based in DC?
It is a completely different pace of living than in Arizona. It's interesting when you watch local news, it's kind of like watching national news. And just having access to so much history. One of our favorite places to go as a family is Mount Vernon. All the different Smithsonian museums. But I find it interesting now that we live here, you have to be very deliberate about making time to do that because you take it a little bit for granted. It's kind of like living in Arizona and never going to the Grand Canyon, or never going to Sedona, or because you live there, you kind of start to take it for granted if you don't make deliberative choices about finding time to fit that stuff in. But I see a lot of value in that, and we really enjoy making a life out here. I do have to say, this school system that my children has access to here is, I don't want to be disparaging too much, but it's much better option than I had access to in Arizona, unfortunately. That's an unfortunate reality that I think a lot of people recognize.
That's great. It's huge when you're a parent to have good school options.
Most definitely. Not to mention all of the culture and the museums and access to so many things happening in government right at your fingertips. Justin, can you tell us about some of the more interesting projects you've encountered while working at NSF?
Yeah, so I mentioned this one briefly, but the blockchain project that we've explored, we have kind of a long road ahead, but I do see that having a lot of potential as being a next generation platform for payment systems and other things to be developed on. I find that kind of work very interesting, and I do have to say there's been a lot of support for innovation within my group here at NSF, particularly in the Division of Financial Management, exploring the use of Tableau, doing data visualizations on how we could make data more accessible to inform better decision making, how it can inform our monitoring efforts and oversight responsibilities. We're rolling out a new notification in the coming month that we're going to be sending out to organizations that have awards that have no payment activity for more than a year, grants that have kind of gone dormant. And so we're sending out we're starting next month by sending out courtesy notices on a quarterly basis for awards that have kind of gone dormant, so that the staff at the university can have appropriate conversations to find out what might be going on. As an example, I had looked at ASU as an example prior to this, and the notice is going to include, I think it was 18 awards. Now, ASU has a significant NSF portfolio size, somewhere between 400 and 500 active awards. And so 18 might seem like a lot, but when you compare it to the portfolio size, it's not as big. But still, 18 awards that haven't had any payment activity for more than a year. Some of them have been quote unquote new awards, but they're more than a year into their period of performance and still have had no payment activity. And so that is a result of this innovative work that we've been doing with Tableau visualizations. We've created a dashboard that we can monitor easier awards that fall into this category, and we can then use the output of that dashboard to inform these emails, these courtesy notifications, and the monitoring efforts associated with that. An example also is we were able to find out of this an organization that had a large number of their, like 99% of their awards fell into this category. And so we did a personal outreach to this organization. We had found out that the person who had been doing their payments had left, and they had not identified a new person to take over that responsibility, and they hadn't assigned them those roles. And so they're like all 27 of their awards had gone more than a year without any reimbursements. And so it's that kind of monitoring that we're looking to improve with these innovations. Another one that we were exploring was how we can help or better monitor burn rates. And so we created a burn rate dashboard. And burn rate is kind of a colloquialism to describe the spending pattern that an award is having. So the percentage of the expenditures that it has as compared to how long or how far into its period of performance it has gone. So if it's 50% through its period of performance and it's 50% expended, you could kind of call that a straight line burn, but hardly any grant follows that straight line. And we did a kind of a experimentation to look at awards that fell into a certain spending quadrant, which would be kind of classified as a slow burn. They're farther into its period of performance with a relatively low expenditure amount. And we took that and we imported the awards into this artificial intelligence program called Lingo4G, where it can take, it does free text analysis and looks for patterns in the text. And the source that we used was progress reports related to these awards. And we wanted to look at different text patterns. What kind of patterns could we see in these progress reports that could have led to the slow burn on these awards? And we found a lot of things related to the pandemic: lab closures, lack of access to daycare, just a variety of different topics that were being described in these progress reports, and we were able to look at this information in a visual manner and quickly pick out different key themes in a matter of seconds. This program was able to look at like 3,000 awards that fit into this spending quadrant of our burn rate dashboard, and then put that up against and analyze 15,000 progress reports in a matter of seconds, and pick out these key themes that we could then kind of dig into further. Travel, like the lack of travel or the lack of ability to get international students, and it was really interesting to do that. We have not operationalized that particular experimentation, but that's the type of innovations that we're looking at, how we could inform or better inform monitoring efforts and fulfilling our oversight requirements.
Cool. Well, I think that was all of our prepared questions. So I think that we'd want to open the floor now. I stopped sharing so that if anyone from the audience just wants to unmute or drop anything into the chat, please feel free to do so. But does anyone else have any questions for Justin at the moment?
I have a question. I know it's a different government agency, but is it similar in terms of working for USAID, the process of applying for those kind of jobs, or an organization like Chemonics, for example, that prefers candidates with experience at that specific government agency?
Yeah, so the most agencies that are domestically located are going to be through USA Jobs. Now, if it's like part of the Foreign Service, like with the Department of State, and I even think USAID has a Foreign Service kind of component, they, I think, have different hiring mechanisms for those types of positions, but for the domestic, it's primarily going to be through USA Jobs. And I think one of the key hurdles that folks that are outside of the federal government, it kind of goes back to that preparing your resume to be federal government ready is probably going to be one of the more bigger hurdles that I have seen.
Thank you.
While we're waiting for another question, just something that I was thinking I'd like to share as a result of my experience of having worked on both sides. The federal government is filled with people who are also just like all of you. You're users of the terms and conditions, the policies. The federal employees are users of it as well. The majority of the people you're going to interact with are not the writers of those policies. And so I just like to encourage folks to not be intimidated when you need to reach out and have conversations with the federal agency staff. And I also want to say it's okay to disagree with the interpretation. You always need to be respectful, but it's okay to push back a little bit if you think a particular interpretation is being applied incorrectly. But be prepared, do your homework, and have citations to support your position if you are going to be pushing back. But again, it's okay to pick up the phone or send an email and have conversation with the federal agency staff.
Thank you. I feel like that's definitely encouraging to hear from our side as well. Okay, so I actually have a few questions that came into the chat from Lindsay Randolph. What do you like most with being at NSF versus ASU, and what do you miss most?
Lindsay's a good colleague. I worked for a number of years with her, so One of the things I find very rewarding at NSF is I find my current environment to be a recharging environment. And let me kind of elaborate on that. Unfortunately, I have found myself at certain points in my career where I had been in an environment that was not recharging, and it consistently took out of my battery, out of my capacity, and it became very exhausting. And I found it to be it kind of got to a point where it was untenable. And that's not the case at NSF. I find that I have lots of opportunities to recharge my battery, and I find it very fulfilling. And so I encourage anybody who's in, assessing their own career, that's an important aspect that you need to have where you are working. It can't always be taken from you and not giving back, because eventually you're going to burn out. And so with that respect, NSF has been a very positive thing for me. And what I miss about ASU, I would have to say it's the people I worked with, the relationships, and I recognize that things consistently change. And so what I look back and miss, even if I were to go back, probably wouldn't be there. But it's those opportunities to just be down in the trenches with the colleagues that I would be working with, solving the problems of the day. I'm sure not much has changed in this respect, but the consistent fire drills that we had to go through, whatever that fire was of the particular day. And the other thing, not necessarily ASU, but the food in Arizona, I miss quite frequently. I cannot get good Mexican food out here.
That's so funny you say that. My family and I were just talking about that last night, about how that's one of our favorite things about living out here is just Mexican food. You can just get great food anywhere you go, like whatever corner. And it's like our most convenient fast food, even though it's not like traditional fast food, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there was actually another question in the chat, and I think that it'll be our last one before Nancy exits us out. But Lindsay also asked, who was your biggest mentor in your career?
I've had a couple. I think about my very first supervisor at ASU. His name was Ed Radwin. He had a significant impact on my career. I think about Bill Hall and all the times that he would give me sound advice when I was struggling. And then here at NSF, there's John Linsky. He's my deputy division director. Cheryl Ruffin, she's retired, but she had been the deputy CFO here at NSF for a number of years. Just the kind of sound advice when I needed kind of a sounding board about how to take that next step or what to do next or how to handle a particular situation. I always had great conversations with Sean Dudley. I still do. Sean is somebody that I meet with quarterly still as a mentor-mentee relationship. When I'm out in Arizona, I try to meet up with him, and when he's out here in DC, he'll reach out and we'll get together. And so those kind of lasting relationships are important to have, for sure.
And it's important to pay it forward to the folks that are now under you.
For sure. That's important.
Yeah,
Nancy.
it sounds like you have a really a wealth of knowledge that you bring. And I think probably the academic experience has really helped you in this next part of your career, this next leg. So we're reaching the end of the session. And so we want to thank everyone who attended. Justin, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for giving us the time. We hope everybody enjoys what's left of the conference today. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah.
again, Justin. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, thanks for having me.